Now we know that some problems cannot be solved with a sword.
And some can't be settled without one.
To the prison you shall go, and into the mask. Wear it until you die in it!
MGMUA came to me with the idea of doing Man in the Iron Mask. What appealed to me about it was that Braveheart was my first film. And here I was with my first film having had this success, winning a bunch of Oscars and getting me a lot of attention. And what I did next was a big question. What appealed to me about this story, other than that it was classic and written by a master storyteller, Alexander Dumas, the original story, was that it was about some men who had achieved great glories as young men, but who were facing a kind of sense of irrelevance. And they wanted to affirm, they needed inside themselves to affirm that they still mattered. And I could relate to that story. I didn't want to feel that the rest of my life was going to be downhill because my first thing was Braveheart. So it enabled me to connect with the kind of story that I was about to tell, and that's really how I connected with Man in the Iron Mask.
I come upon the king's business. He wishes to see you.
Still you serve him loyally, even though the people throw rotten eggs at his royal emblem. D'Artagnan, look at you. You look so young. And I feel so old.
Every time I've adapted anything, I swear I'm never going to do it again, because I like the freedom to make up the story any way I want to go, and there is an obligation in an adaptation to be as faithful as you can be, and at the same time you have to understand you're making a film and you're not doing just a translation of an original piece. Man in the Iron Mask was not even a novel originally. It was written as a serialization, much like you'd see a television series now of Alexander Dumas' day. The story didn't have the kind of focus that we would want for a 2-hour film. But what the story did have was these magnificent characters. And it had a setting that was intriguing about a king who may or may not have a secret twin brother. I was intrigued by all of that, but I felt that I needed to really invent another story around it. The story of D'Artagnan's direct involvement and personal relationship with that young king was something that I came up with on my own, and it was when the story really lit up for me.
Majesty, every day of your life, I have watched over you. I have bled for you. I have prayed every day to see you become greater than your office, better than the law. Please show me what my faith and my blood have purchased. Show mercy.
In terms of the themes of Man in the Iron Mask, I was convinced that I was being faithful to Dumas. I wanted to be faithful to him because I felt inspired by him. I loved the way Dumas had written the characters and the sense of loyalty and fun that the characters had. Dumas was talking about men who truly had a sense of honor, who loved each other deeply, who wanted to be in each other's company and would rather die in each other's company than live in the company of lesser men. And I wanted to write a story that affirmed that kind of attitude.
If Philippe is in the Bastille, then to the Bastille we will go.
I'd rather die covered in blood than an old man lying in my own piss.
The Man in the Iron Mask has been done over a dozen times. And the Musketeer stories have been done, several dozen times on film. And inevitably they're going to have to say, all for one, one for all. They're going to have to put their swords together. You're going to have to do that moment. And that was really a challenge. And for me, what made that inspiring on a story level was the sense that I knew they might say it, but in what context they said it was open. And for this film, they were in a situation in which they had really been divided.
What we fought for is greater than king or rank or reward. What do you fight for now? I fight for the belief that every man can be better.
Even Louis.
Whatever the plan, I am with you. The next time we meet, one of us will die.
To have Athos come and join in that, the one for all for one moment.
If we must die, let it be like this.
One for all for one.
When they come and join together and they know they're about to die, it means something different than a kind of casual high five. I had some fabulous support in doing this. This was the first time I'd ever set action in anything. I hadn't directed a high school play, but I had directed a lot of movies in my own mind, of course. And for me, that was about the thematics. It was about a faithfulness to a vision of the story.
Grabs him and the other musketeers move to George.
I was tremendously excited, but I also have to admit to the fact that I was riding at the head of a huge production, and it's one thing to be a writer who is standing there looking at things thinking, I would do it this way if I were running everything, and to be the guy that's actually got to decide how everything is done. When I decided I wanted to become a director, I thought, look, it's not enough that I try to convince other people. The one I really have to convince is myself. I have to believe that I am a director before someone else can believe that I'm a director. I have to prepare. I went to acting classes. I'll never be an actor, but I wanted to learn what actors feel. I wanted to become better. All of those things to try to prepare myself to face the unknown. But the first time you do it is the first time you do it. There's no possible way around that.
Propose to do?
Replace the king. I cannot listen to this.
It can't be done. It can't. I know the way.
I am a young king, but I am king.
Then be a good king.
One for all for one.
Casting is an essential ingredient, but it's really easy to get into a kind of box about it and to think that there's only one person who can do this role. I can tell you I've never written a role thinking that I was writing for a particular actor. I didn't write these roles with any actors in mind. But having finished a script, I would say, well, who's the ideal actor to play this given part?
Even were I not a priest, I could see that your heart carries a secret weight, and that it is hurting you to bear it alone.
I cannot betray my king.
I had always thought Gabriel Byrne had this mystique, a kind of romantic mystery about it. And I met with him and I just liked him instantly.
I have loved you always. None but you. No matter what happens. I pray you remember that.
I read an article in a magazine, and it was about his marriage, and he had divorced from Ellen Barkin. But the article said, you and Ellen have been divorced for some time, and there has never been one negative thing said by either one of you about the other, ever. And that's remarkable in Hollywood. And Gabriel was quoted in the article as saying, well, she's the mother of my children. She was my wife. I have nothing ever to say about her negative. I still think highly of her, and that's the way it'll always be. And I thought, that's D'Artagnan. That guy is D'Artagnan.
When
the great D'Artagnan visits, he must be offered the best wine.
And if the great Athos offers, then the great D'Artagnan must drink.
John Malkovich walks in his first day of rehearsal, and he sat down, and he said, "You know, Randall, it's a strange thing. An actor doesn't want to commit to a role unless he believes it works. But the irony is he can't possibly know it works unless he commits. So I'll do the scenes hanging upside down with a carrot up my butt if you want me to." And I thought, John, you magnificent, you magnificent guy. And throughout that production, he would come by at different times, which were sometimes extremely difficult for me, physically and emotionally, and just sort of throw his arm around my shoulder and look at me and say, "Are you okay?" And it's that kind of thing that makes a production both creatively alive and humanly alive, because you've got to get through it emotionally. You've got to bond. So John, in those ways, helped me believe in what the story was about. He was a musketeer for me.
I love Paris. I love life. I love you, ladies. Now get busy, except for you.
Gerard is one of the most magical people you could ever meet. Poetic, emotional. He walked in that first day when all the other actors were already there and said, "I am Porthos. I am Porthos." He threw the script onto the table. He said, "This is perfect. Don't change a word. Where is the bathroom?" Pushed the door open, didn't close the door, threw up the toilet seat, started to pee, and he must have peed for 5 straight minutes. And we all went, "Porthos is here."
Forgive me.
He gave us these magnificent, spontaneous performances in which he became the character instantly. Gerard was like king of Paris. He would ride around, bomb around Paris on his motorcycle. He threw parties at his home for us in which he would cook, and we'd set a table outside, and it felt like such a family. And he really gave us that.
You're surrounded by beauty, by intrigue, by danger. What more can a man want?
Jeremy is an incredibly intense and cerebral kind of actor, and yet he does work instinctively. He thinks through what he's doing, and you know he does because he's such an intellectual. But at the same time, his performances have a gentle gravity that he was just perfect for Aramis. But he was challenging, and yet he would listen to me, a first-time director, and work through it with me. And we ended up, I think, having a really great relationship, and I know his performance was magnificent.
We're offering you a chance to be king.
No. You're offering me a chance to pretend to be king. A king that you hate.
Not everyone hates him.
Don't you?
When I cast Leonardo, he was coming out of Titanic, and Titanic was widely expected to be an absolute financial disaster. So I didn't cast Leo because I thought he was coming off a hit movie. I thought he is the perfect actor. I just thought he was the ideal actor to play this. And by the time the movie came out, Titanic had come out and was starting to roll, and all anybody wanted to talk about in the press junket was, what is it like to work with Leonardo DiCaprio? Which, of course, it was amazing to work with Leo, but it was also amazing to work with all the other guys.
I will burn in hell. So will you?
No, my love. You will burn in hell. I will not, for I am king, ordained by God.
I knew that he was an actor who could play 2 different roles and be utterly believable. What I loved about working with him was that he brought a kind of honest vulnerability to the role. And a lot of young actors, and a lot of actors, a lot of writers, a lot of human beings in general, don't know how to combine a kind of vulnerability and strength. They can get one aspect, but they can't get the other. Leo, if you look at the scene in which he's been cleaned up, and they're telling him that the hopes of all of France rest on him, and the strength of him trying to rise, of this character, to rise to that moment, and yet feeling the sense of being overwhelmed, was to me just mesmerizing. I found it just magical to watch what Leo was doing. It's an interesting thing for me about that Three Musketeers phenomenon. And I think there's something about a bond of friendship for anybody that's captivating, but particularly for these guys because they represented different archetypes. They represented different special aspects of personalities. Aramis is spiritual and calculating. Athos is courageous and passionate. D'Artagnan is profoundly honorable and full of loyalty. And Porthos is just full of the love of life. And I tried to follow that in the casting. I looked for people who exuded the kind of spirit that I thought each of these characters could be. So to walk into the cafeteria during the rehearsal period and to see a table that had John Malkovich and Jeremy Irons and Gerard Depardieu and Gabriel Byrne, and then Leonardo DiCaprio, this young lion sitting there with them, and that they were becoming, in a way, in life, what they were portraying on the screen was really special.
Your Majesty, there are riots in Paris.
Riots? But Paris is the most beautiful city in the world. Why should my people feel anything but pride and contentment?
Well, yes, I'm sure they are content and proud, but they are also starving.
I really wanted to be in France, and a big question, of course, is whether you can go anywhere economically. One of the issues about doing the film like this is that if you can find practical locations, if you can find places that you can use instead of building those sets, then generally speaking, that's a financial advantage for you. But one of the problems was we could have shot in Versailles. The agency that controls it in France gave us permission to shoot, but they said we couldn't put up any lights and we couldn't move anything around, which of course made it useless for us. But beyond that is that Versailles has several hundred years of candle wax and soot and grime on it. It's still, of course, a magnificent palace, but it looks several hundred years old. So Anthony Pratt was able to recreate for us interiors which sparkled. And when you look at those rooms, and you couldn't tell the difference between that and an actual palace, except that maybe ours looked better. Ours looked like they would look when Louis XIV first walked into them. But he did other things that were of particular value. We were going to shoot in the basement of Saint-Sulpice, which is an ancient cathedral there, and underneath that are some tunnels that date back to, I mean, literally a couple of thousand years. And we wanted to be there, but because they were just over 1,000 years old, there were places you couldn't really disturb and do anything to. So Tony created a kind of catacomb set.
Tomb? We're in a tomb?
All of that was a set that Tony Pratt created, and that was probably my favorite of all. I really wanted to shoot at Vaux-le-Vicomte because I thought it was inspiring. I thought it related to the thematics of the movie. It had that interesting connection of the man who had built it being possibly one of the characters who could have been the man in the Iron Mask. And we decided to send the production there. We promptly ran into the rainiest June in 137 years. And we had mud up to our knees there. By the time it did become sunny, then we had this glorious, rich green and beautiful sky, cloudy, wispy white clouds when we finally did get to shoot in those sunny days, and you know, it shows on film.
Behold, our unicorn! Whoever captures our unicorn shall win its treasure.
One of the happy accidents about this production was that I had originally written the pig chase as occurring in a maze, and this was a kind of historical mistake on my part to write it as a hedge maze, which they had in England, but they really didn't have a lot of those in France. That was more English than French. Because of that, I had to come up with some other methodology, and when we'd been touring around France on our scout, I noticed how much they loved fountains and how beautiful the fountains were. So we came up with a notion of using a kind of spray hedge for the waterworks to be the device that Louis uses to separate Christine from the others. And our special effects team put that all together really well, and the spray of the water and the sunshine, when we did have the sunny day, it looked just like liquid diamonds. I felt so fortunate when James Atchison agreed to design the costumes for us. He is an extraordinarily accomplished designer, and what he did was not only beautiful, it also had a personality to it.
Our old uniforms from our days of glory. I was saving them so that we could wear them in death. And so we shall.
He'd researched the black uniforms of the Musketeers and found that the Musketeers had worn black at a certain time, but then they moved into the blues. And that's the way costume designers like to work, is they want to find things that are authentic. That's kind of the classic sort of argument that a director will have with a costume designer, because they don't want to do anything that's historically inaccurate. But James and I were able to negotiate through that to get costumes that were accurate historically and yet had a kind of uniqueness, a kind of gunfighter Western quality to what the Musketeers wore. And in every case, the costumes were just magnificent, I thought.
As for you, my brother, back to the prison you shall go, and into the mask you hate.
Louis, don't!
Wear it until you love it! And die in it.
The design of the mask was one of the most crucial elements we faced in designing the look of the film. And I had a whole team of wonderful artists there, and Tony Pratt's department with production design, and a great storyboard artist, Dan Sweetman, there. And we also had found Gianetto De Rossi. And he had come in to interview about our hair and makeup, and he had done an incredible design for what Leo would look like had he lived inside the mask all this time. And as soon as he showed me that, I knew he was the one I wanted to hire to be our hair and makeup specialist. So when we were trying to design the mask, Russell Smith said, you know, Gianetto is really artistic. We should give him a crack at this. He's this passionate Italian, and he said, Randall, I will design a mask for you. The next day, he came in with that, and he showed it to me, and I just got goosebumps. It was this dual design of a separate face piece that fit over, and then the clamps around it, and it was so dramatic the way it worked, and so perfect. And he had done it and designed it out in an acrylic that looked exactly like metal, and it was just the perfect mask. My director of photography was Peter Shishitsky. I'd seen some of Peter's work, and I thought it was really tremendous, and I wanted a kind of classical look to the movie. Not that I was able to really tell Peter to give him any particular artistic guidance, except to say, these are the feelings that I want to get, and I believe that's really what we delivered. I think the movie has a real visual beauty to it. He sure did a magnificent job. The look of the picture speaks for itself.
Musketeers! Salute! One for all for one!
The timelessness of the Musketeers is a marvel. And I believe it has to do with a kind of extraordinary character that we all wish we had and that we all aspire to. I'll tell you a little story that happened at the very end of the whole actual active period of making the movie. The very last thing you do when you're exhausted from everything else is you go out and you do press junkets and you have interviews. My final interview I ended up doing alone, and it was with a journalist in Japan. And I had this fantastic interpreter whom I never met in person, but she did that simultaneous translation. The last question was, why do you do stories about honor and sacrifice and love? And I thought for a moment. No one had asked me anything of the sort. So here's this question coming from Japan about that. And I said, well, I suppose it's because I believe that the second greatest wealth any man can have is to have someone in his life who would die for him. But the greatest wealth you can have is someone in your life that you would die for. And then I heard him say, and she laughed and said, he says that you are a samurai, and when you come to Tokyo, he wants to get drunk with you. And I thought, this is a perfect example of why this is a story to tell, and why I feel good about having told this story in affirming the values of these guys who have people in their lives who would die for them and for whom they would die.
This is the death I have always wanted. All for one. One.
You know, it's really difficult to judge a sense of, a question of how good is a film. But I can tell you that I succumbed to the sin of pride about it, because I love the film. I love what people did in it. I love getting letters to this day from people, mostly young people, who say they love the film. I've gotten letters from mothers who tell me that they watch it with their kids. They like the values in it. When I think of Man in the Iron Mask, the first thing that flashes into the pit of my stomach is a kind of gratitude and thrill of the heroes of our business who stepped up and believed in an absolutely untried guy who was about to direct his first film. That guys like John Malkovich and Gabriel Byrne and Leonardo DiCaprio, and the first one to say yes was Gerard Depardieu. And the thrill that I got when guys of that stature looked me in the eye and said, oh, I'd love to be in this. That's what has stayed with me.